fascinated by the paranormal. So much so that he's been making movies on the topic for the last 5 years. One of his most recent projects, which has been picking up traction online, touches on an urban legend, but in a new location.
Lake Superior, the tumultuous inland sea known as Kichigame to the ancients, stretches from Minnesota to Michigan and severs Canada from the United States. In the northern reaches of the Great Lake, in the deep thicket, is something only few have witnessed and far fewer dare to mention. Known by the natives of this land as Zabe, to others, Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Winding through the dense wilderness along the shores of the Great Lake lies the main artery of Canadian travel, Highway 17. This vital stretch of road connects a tiny populace of sparse northern communities to cities great and small across Ontario. It is here in these parts where by chance man meets myth. What follows are the accounts of both bewilderment and terror at the revelation of Sasquatch. It was here on Lake Superior, the northern mouth of the Nipigon River, where legend was forged into written archive, as something evil was stirred up and turned loose on the small settlement. Nevertheless, the story was relayed at the time to a Hudson's Bay Company merchant during the fur trade era. At Parmachene, not 5 miles from Lake Helen on the Nipigon River, the natives found that they were not alone. A chimera became a reality as something dark and mysterious made its presence known. Whispers set in. A quiet terror began to spread among the villagers, which they called the Monzo Khan, known as a bad spirit, clever with an ability to become corporeal, to knock on dwellings and even enter at will, shifting things around and playing tricks on the inhabitants. It seems locals out trapping deep in the woods had seen the creature and came back with tales of terror. But quickly, campfire stories became much more. It followed them home and was just beyond their settlement in the tree line, watching and waiting. One night, as the creature became emboldened, it had taken a native girl and ran off into the woods. At dawn, far from the fear of night, they dispatched a search party. Later, screams were heard as she had escaped its clutches and came into the sight of the search party covered in scratches and mosquito bites, her clothing shredded and torn from the entanglement of the thicket as she told the party of her escape. Nights following, the boisterous creature began screaming loudly outside of their encampment, throwing rocks and sticks at the dwellings. At the height of the Monzokan's reign of terror, it killed one of the villagers. The panicked lot was faced with a harsh decision. Stay and deal with it once and for all, risking more lives, or make a getaway on the river and keep their number alive. Every man, woman, and child set off and crossed to the eastern shore of Lake Helen, the current site of the reservation. The merchant laughed and shrugged it off, but nevertheless wrote down the story. Before he had left, he was warned it was in the area, which meant the creature had now followed to Lake Helen, Red Rock Reserve.
Whenever I've gone up to the Black Sturgeon Dam, because I used to go there lots as a kid, and I still go there quite often, but I would always, well, not all the time, but some of the time I would feel as if there's somebody watching me. You get that sensation that there's eyes on you. And meanwhile, I'm the only one up there, because I took the quad, so it's just me up there. And there's nobody else around, but I just feel like someone's watching me. And then one time there was also, I actually heard whistling faintly in the wind, which was just out of nowhere, and again, there was nobody there. So it's always been a kind of a intriguing place and something going on up there. But back in the early 2000s, when I was probably 15 or 16, I was out canoeing with one of my friends up above the dam on the Black Sturgeon River. And we were going for a while, we're paddling up the river, and then we just happened to glance down outside the boat, and we could see at the bottom of the river and that there was these footprints. And it was weird because they were in the middle of the river basically as soon as you could see the bottom, so it was still quite deep, but they were coming from the other side, and they just went up all the way out the side of the river and into a swamp. And it was just out of nowhere. It was really weird. We just happened to see them, and then so we figured, let's go see where they go. So we followed them into the swamp, but we could only go so far before the water got too shallow and too bushy and everything. So we followed them as far as we could, and they just went into a swamp and then into the bush, and away they disappeared. They were probably about that big, like I'd say between 16 and 18 inches. They were definitely quite fresh, because being on the bottom of a flowing river, they're not going to stay there long before the water movement just rinses them away. And they were still discernible that they were footprints at that point. You could see that they were almost human-like, but too big. And you could see like the toes, and they were quite similar to human feet, but they were big ones. And yeah, so they must have been quite recent before we got there. I'd say maybe minutes even they must have crossed before we were coming up the river.
Do you feel that it's the same creature because it's the same area? It's the same creature that could be whistling and watching?
It very well could be. I don't know for sure because I didn't really get any other info aside from just the whistling and being watched. But it could be what watches quietly from the bushes, or right. So it may have been that. Yeah, it wasn't just like some little animal in the bush, because otherwise you would have the feeling of being watched constantly. Because I'd say pretty much any given time there's probably something watching you, but you don't get the feeling from it unless it's something that is actually knows what is going on and like making itself unknown to you.
One woman relayed to me her story that as a child, she spent many summers riding across Canada with family from BC to Sault Ste. Marie. As her mother, father, and sisters passed Thunder Bay, night was falling, and her father assumed a hotel would be no problem to find. It grew later and later. No vacancy after no vacancy was passed. They found less and less truck stops. She could tell her father was tired, and they managed to find a lonely rest stop outside of Wawa. As the family dozed off, the noise began. At first, it was faint yelling in the distance. Her heart began to pound as she tried to keep her eyes closed and ignore it. The shrieking grew louder and more pronounced. They could ignore it no longer. Her mother anxiously asked, "Andre, do you hear that?" "Yes," he replied. "What is that?" the frightened child asked. No response was given. The shrieks became louder and louder and more guttural, animalistic. They listened and determined it was not an injured animal, nor was it an angry man screaming in the woods. What was once a distant noise became a terror slicing through the night air as the family shuddered in their vehicle. Finally, having heard enough, they drove off with no idea what they had just heard. The next morning, they scoured the papers for an explanation, hoping to find that they'd see a headline, "Man Missing," anything to find an answer. There was nothing. She recalls her mother could only say one thing: Wendigo. To this day, she has never heard that sound again, but will also never forget its frightening screams.
The visual and non-visual sightings of my Bigfoot experience is in Pass Lake, Ontario. It's about 45 minutes outside of Thunder Bay. So yeah, like about 1986, maybe earlier. Can't really say earlier, about 1986. I remember having a dream as a kid, and I just wake up and I'm screaming, calling for my mom. My mom comes in, she's calming me down. She's asking me what's going on. I'm telling her I had a bad dream, and all of a sudden I look at the end of my bed, and I'm sharing the top bunk with, I got the top bunk, my sister's got the bottom. And I remember my mom's calming me down, and I happen to look out at the window, and there's these red eyes. They kind of staring at you. And it's like, holy man, like, as a kid, you're freaking out even more because, you had a bad dream, now something's looking in on you. So my mom's like, calm me down again. She's like, what? I'm like screaming, red eyes, the eyes looking at me. She turns around and they disappear. So she turns her back and they reappear. There's kind of like the shift and the shift. So yeah, that was the earlier non-visual setting. But, being an adult now, you're hearing the tales and people's similar experiences. People are talking about red eyes and stuff like that, peering through windows and stuff. And so now I can start piecing all these earlier things together with today's stories and stuff. So that was pretty much the earliest sighting, I guess. August of 87, 88. So there's me and my sister and the neighbor's grandson. We were racing up and down the driveway. And we had one race where we, go up to the top of the driveway, we're racing down, and sure enough, the neighbor's grandson beats us down to the end of the driveway. Jumps on an old ice racing car sitting there, and he's just sitting there chilling, and I come down, my sister's behind me, and he looks over to the side of the bush, and he starts screaming Bigfoot, okay, get down, like, whoa, geez, there's something standing in the bush. It's black. Like, it's not a black bear. Because as a kid, you know what a dump bear looks like. And that's the average bear that we have. So, they're on 4 feet. Like, you've seen them stand up. But when a black bear stands up, it stands up like this. It's got its front paws that counteracting the balance. This was just standing off in the bush. And it looked to be like a tall adult, just black. Like, it wasn't wearing clothing. You couldn't see nothing moving. So whatever. Kids were booking it back up. We get back up and we're telling his granddad, like, hey, guess what we saw? We saw Bigfoot. And he's like, oh, no. It's not a Bigfoot. There's no such thing as Bigfoot. It's a swamp man. So he's an old French guy. He's telling us swamp man tales. And my friend's grandmother's like, no, don't tell him that story. It's only going to creep him out even more. So me and my sister, we booked it home because we didn't want to stick around and find out what's going on. So yeah, we went home. About a day or two later, their grandson calls me up, and it's about 10 in the morning, and it just happened to be either rain. It happened to have either rained or maybe just really dewy that morning. So I bike over. He's got something big to show me, and bike over, get up to this house, knock on the door, get him. And he comes, he said, man, I let Terry out this morning, the little dog, and, it chased the Bigfoot. I'm like, come on, no, there's no way. Your granddad told us this. There's no such thing. He's like, no, really, you got to come down and see what I saw, like what I found. Okay, whatever, so I'll indulge him, I'll go down. And so he takes me down the driveway to the spot where the dog ran off in the bush after or something. And he's like, look, and he's pointing at the ground, at the puddle. And I'm like, what? He's like, look at the footprint, look at the footprint. So, yeah, sure enough, there's a footprint there. Looking at it, and it's like, that's just not right. Like, this is the size of our footprint, but a little bit smaller. So I'm sitting there as a kid thinking, like, no, you done this. You put your brother up to it. And it's like, no, his brother's not here. And just looking at it, it was the size of an infant's footprint. It was had to have been about that big. It wasn't the typical Bigfoot print or track that you see today. It didn't have the 5 toes all lined up, and it wasn't about that long. This was like the size of an infant's. But the weirder thing was that it was so fresh, that you could see all the dermal ridges, you could see all the lines on the foot, and you'd have 4 toes, and then you'd have one extra one coming off to the side, like a chimp or an ape or maybe an orangutan. But it was just the size of an infant's, and that stuck in my head for years. And I'm thinking, like, man, if I saw that again, I know what to do. I could take a cast of that. But I've talked to many people about it. They're like, hey, you should have done this. Like, I was a kid. How am I supposed to know what to do, you know? Thinking of like a human footprint. It was the exact same shape, size, but it was just like an infant. But the toe, that was the biggest thing, was the toe was off. It had all these little 4 toes and then another toe here. It didn't line up like that, but it was just like that. Really look up like an orangutan or a chimp footprint, and that's the closest resemblance I can call. And just recently, in about 2016, maybe 2017, it was about June or July, I'm at my property out in the country by Pass Lake, keeping the upkeep there. And I'm out back mowing the lawn, and I just shut it off, and I hear the leaves being kicked up. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool, you know, what's over there? A skunk, porcupine, and stop, I'm looking, curiosity. It's been a while since I've been in the bush, and so I'm sitting there waiting for this, whatever it is, maybe a bird, skunk, and porcupine to come out, and it's just moving away, but nothing's there. It's like, well, that's weird. Okay, stand there a little more, wait, watch, and nothing's reappearing. It's just moving farther into the bush. So now my curiosity's piqued, you know. Okay, what's going on? So I start following it down, and I've got this trail cut. So I follow the trail all the way around, and I'm like, I'm gonna cut it off. I'll go up ahead of it and see what it is. This curiosity kills the cat, I guess. So I walk around, cut it off. And I'm like, you know, I can hear it coming down the bush line. I'm like, well, I really want to see what it is, because it's making a lot of noise for something so small. So it's like, okay, I'll just sneak off over the property line. I'm going to sit here and just tuck and wait. So I tuck down, I'm sitting there waiting, and I can hear it coming down. But, so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, now these leaves being kicked up turn into footprints, like foot stomps. And there's at least 4 or 5 of them coming at me. And I'm like, oh God, the neighbor's all pissed off. He's going to come at me. You know, boom, boom, boom. And it literally came in within about a 5, I would say maybe 6 foot radius of me. In about this kind of area, like right about there. So 6 feet. And I'm like, whoa, something's here. Something big is here. And I'm sitting there waiting. I'm like looking around. I get up because I'm really kind of peeked out. Something that big's walking at you. I'm like, it could be a bear. It's not a bear because I don't see nothing. It's not the neighbor because nobody's standing there. But nothing else happens. There's nothing walking away, nothing walking towards me. And it's like, okay, time to get out of here because something big walked at me in the bush. I don't want any part of this. So I took off, I left well enough be and walked away from that. Like heavy footprints. Like, man, if I could place a weight, it wouldn't be the weight of a 185-pound man. It'd have to be the weight of 250 plus, like stomping at you, like really peeled. That's, you know, like, yeah, that's about the best that I can average. Like, you know, to a height, no, you can't really place a height on something you can't see, but to a weight, when you're sitting there and it's 6 feet or maybe less away from you, then you can start placing an average weight because these are heavy prints. And like, that's why I really wasn't too sure if it was a bear. Bears are going to grunt and growl, but somebody mad at you, somebody upright, they're going to stomp to get your attention. And this stomped at me, and I'm like, eee.
In a prehistoric context, some creatures managed to survive multiple ice ages, such as the crocodile, the sturgeon, and a host of other creatures. Things that shouldn't be here, and yet are. as nature couldn't kill them. If the human root can survive, why couldn't such a smart, resourceful being, whether an ancient archaic race of human, the giants of old, a simian-like creature, to ancient terrestrial spirits, to shapeshifters, to interdimensional beings in a multiverse, those who have seen have often been silent in their contemplation. Lives change. Belief in something more becomes a reality, and a great respect for the ancient stories passed down become very real. In prehistory, the Marinag people are thought to be the first inhabitants of Lake Superior's northern shore. As the Ojibwe tribe grew, the Marinag were absorbed into the culture as one. Whether first known to the Marinag or the Ojibwe, the wild man was just as unfeigned as the eagle and the wolf, living reciprocally with them, so much as to become engraved in the 7 grandfather teachings. Zabet teaches truth from the very heart, speaking to one's mind and body in dreams and visions, inspiring those who seek guidance. He leads down the right path as a teacher, a motivator, bringing positivity in the dark places, and at times of need will physically show himself to the one who beseeches to say, "I am here. Remember what I have told you." In the culture, seeing one is considered a gift. At other times, only fleeting glances of the massive creature are seen, leaving the witness startled, oftentimes questioning the very nature of reality.
Yeah, this thing even shut down. That was weird.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Strange that all the electronics and that. Yeah, it's kind of.
That's messed up.
It is. It's almost like an omen to say that. Hey, it's we're talking about something taboo that probably 90% of the population doesn't believe. You know, I've always believed it, always since I was a kid, and that just more or less confirmed my beliefs that there is such a thing as a Sasquatch. No two ways to deny that. No, that's for sure. Seeing is believing, as they say, right? Like I remember as a kid, my uncles and aunts talking about the Sasquatch down the mouth of the Pick River. And, you know, we've always paid, I don't know, I didn't really search for it. It just happened. Just bang, there it was. One day, or back in 2011, we went on a smoke run. And the 3 boys went and got our smokes, hopped in the car at the local reservation, hit the Wharf Road as we usually do every Sunday, popped one of the boys on my lap to steer down the road. We come around in the corner and see this 12 to 14 foot, I don't know, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, walking, just strolling across the road. Just another day in his life, I guess. And it was like nothing happened. He looked at us, we looked at him, I looked at me. Wow, you see that shit? Nobody's ever going to believe us. And of course we tell people that and they think we're fucking crazy, right? But in reality, we know what we saw, and there's no two ways about it. None. No two ways about it at all. And we're actually on the location right where it crossed the road, exactly where it crossed the road. Like I say, we got out, we looked around, we looked for marks, footprints. I'm sure there was something. I'm not a professional tracker or anything, so we did, and that was it. We went on our merry way. He or she went on its merry way, and that was it. That's my Bigfoot story. It was silverish gray. It had some characteristics of Harry and the Hendersons, close, but yeah, it was a meaner looking Harry and the Hendersons is what I can compare it to. Gray and silver, and yeah, it was like, I'm hoping I see it again, or he or she, whatever it may be. I'm hoping I run into it again, but whether I do or I don't, I can always claim that I've seen one, and I know in my heart I've seen it. There's no denying that. Nobody can tell me any different. Nobody can tell me I'm crazy because I know what I saw. Oh, I do believe. I've always believed from when I was a kid, because I firmly believe my aunts and uncles and my grandfather wouldn't be BSing me about these stories of Bigfoot down the mouth of the Pick. I remember plain as day sitting there early, I don't know, 1975, 76, My grandfather locked up all the doors, closed all the windows, and said, "Do not look outside. Do not go outside." We got all the men. We're going down to the mouth of the pick. Apparently, they've seen a Sasquatch down there, a Bigfoot. And that was it. We stayed inside that whole day and waited and waited and waited, and nobody came back with anything. So,
Why were they after it in the first place?
I don't know. I think back then the beliefs weren't as strong as they are now. From the 70s to 2017, I think the First Nations beliefs aren't as strong as they were back then as they are now. Like, we're more, how do you say it? We're more developing our culture and learning more as the years go by. And back then we didn't have anything to go on. We don't have like the modern stuff nowadays to look into our previous cultures and that. To me, I think they did it out of protection for the people on the reserve. That's why I think they went out and hunted it, because they didn't know what nobody really knew what Bigfoot and Sasquatch was about back then. We've heard of it, but we've never actually. We don't know whether it's going to come and terrorize the town, or they didn't know. They're just protecting the families, right? And that's, to me, that's why they went out and did it. Whether they saw it and had a chance to shoot it, I highly doubt it. But I don't know. To me, there's a reason why he showed himself to us. There's some reason I don't know about, and maybe that's what I have to figure out, why they exposed themselves to myself and 3 boys and my friend. There's got to be a reason behind it. I've never really looked into it because, people think you're crazy when they start talking about stuff like this. But until it actually happens to somebody, then, how can you say you don't believe? How can you say it?
According to stories when encountered, Sasquatch strikes fear into the hearts of men, like being caught in an instantaneous horror, unable to move. Whether the sudden shock of stumbling across such a creature is the cause, or the use of infrasound. The moment of paralysis and panic is as real as the subject's surroundings. The creature, according to mythos, is said to use magic to vanish, or cloaking itself like the chameleon when startled. Some are said to stay as still as a rock, and then instantaneously dematerialize into nothing in a glance, or sometimes said to step through what is described as a door. Some are said to move about in the unseen and still affect the physical world as if in a connected parallel universe. Whether you ascribe to a physical being or spirit, our world has many strange and mystifying factors legitimate science can only dispel by theorizing, ignoring, or ridiculing, yet cannot fully explain. Whether you give credence to a man-like creature inhabiting the woods or not, it is important to be mindful. The first peoples had already known they were not alone, so much so as to call them the shy people of the Northwest. Whether ascribed to as a physical being or spirit, stories from all over the continent have been widely spread throughout history. From the first peoples to settlers, to inland fishermen, to trappers, to drivers, to loggers, to hunters, to those lost in the woods stumbling across the mythical being. Stories arise of wood knocks, rocks clacking together, screams, howls, rock throwing, sticks and trees being thrown, to full-on attacks of hunters and road workers. Perhaps that feeling of being watched is paranoia, or maybe a reality. It's possible they are watching strangers trample through their environs from the canopy, and trekkers are right to feel watched, and that they shouldn't be there. It can also be asked, if such a being exists, then why has there been no capture? Some have said capture has occurred, but no such proof exists. DNA evidence cannot say for certain this is Sasquatch, but only state of unknown origin. Scientifically, only a body can suffice. In some places, Sasquatch is so real, law prevents the shooting of such a creature. Perhaps someday soon someone will stumble across remains. But for such a rare article, chances are slim in such a massive, widespread area. Perhaps they bury their dead, or find inaccessible places to die, such as mountainside caves, underground caverns, crevices, or maybe just give their bodies to nature to devour. One can say, follow the crow. Hunters understand crows often lead to dead or dying animals. But as for Lake Superior, at 82,000 square kilometers, the land in Ontario is 1.0 million square kilometers alone. Prospectively, you can fit Lake Superior 12 times into such a space. And in that lies the impossibility of finding a body to convince legitimate scientists and biologists. To those who believe without question, or to those who have seen, no further evidence is needed. Not to them, just the wanting for others to know it is real, that they can't help what they've seen. For the people of the Lake Superior region, such thing can easily be dismissed by the majority. But for the few who have seen it, they will never be dismayed. That handful of witnesses attesting their claim will never give up that easily, and stand together in the belief something's out here.